Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's our 8th episode. Glad you could join us for some social conservative conversation. No compromise and definitely no apology from any of us. Tonight the theme is education, 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 and for parents and caregivers this is especially relevant for you tonight. Now you can watch on our website familyfirstnz, also on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, and if you're on Facebook or YouTube you can share your comments to the panel, submit any questions you may have. Ricky was on super early and said how's everyone doing tonight. Thanks Ricky. And the good news is that for the first time we're also streaming live on my page on LinkedIn and also the Family First NZ and the Bob McCoskrie NZ handle on Twitter. So we're going to try and outrate Tucker Carlson. So it's fantastic. Now let's just introduce the panel. So let's get the Brady Bunch in. We've got a couple missing this week, but we've got the ones that count. Firstly, down in the South Island, we've got Bruce Logan. How are you, Bruce?
I'm fine, thank you, Bob.
Very good. It must be getting very cold down there. We're well out of summer. It's all downhill, is it?
Well, it wasn't bad. I walked today out in when the sun was shining, but it was coolish.
Okay. Well, the really cool place to be is Mangere, which is where Ashley is. How are you, Ashley?
Mangere.
He wishes.
Yeah.
I knew I was feeling disoriented, but that's a little bit
And below Ashley is Ala. Ala, you've got a new job, I hear. How's the new boss?
He's all right. Treats me well. Evening,
Good.
everyone.
Make sure he does, otherwise he'll get a good beating from us all. And Ashley is in Esk Valley, still cleaning up there, Ashley?
I get two mentions, Ronji. I get yours and mine. It's all good. The roads are open again, so life's back to normal.
Okay, I got some great feedback from the people team. Peter said, thanks so much for your efforts in the program tonight. It makes welcome relief listening to common sense instead of the 6 p.m. news. Keep up the great work on our behalf. This one from Beverly says, to tell you the truth, I prefer you on your own, Bob, to this new one, mainly because I trust what you say. It's not easy to understand or trust these other people.
I'll give us time.
That's excellent, Beverly. Thanks for that. Thanks for that feedback, Beverly. That's really good.
I agree.
Now from Chris, congratulations on another great evening of Sense and Sensibility. That's Bruce's favourite show. I now look forward very much to Monday nights listening to the panel's views on a variety of topics that affect us all. You all have really worthwhile views to share, and you're all talking about stuff that's so sadly lacking from the mainstream media and so desperately needed. So that is from Chris. And finally, Ronji is doing a fantastic job. He looks good, sounds good, and I would vote for him for Prime Minister, signed Benna. Who's Benna? That's your wife.
Jen is my beautiful wife. You better watch your mouth, Bob. Better watch your mouth.
All right, let's get straight into the free speech moment. And 4 of you have opted to take up the offer, so we're going to do this in alphabetical order. And it's going to be, I should just say, we've got a special guest tonight, Alwyn Poole, who we will bring into the program very shortly. And he is our expert on education, so I'll introduce him shortly. But firstly, free speech moment. So we'll do it alphabetically, as I said. So we're going to go Bruce, Ronji, Bob, and Ashley.
Of course.
It's because it's on education. I just wanted to make sure you knew your alphabet. So, okay, yeah, okay. So Bruce, your 90 seconds. Oh, what's your topic? Your topic is language tyranny. I can't even spell tyranny. 90 seconds starts now.
When I use a word, said Humpty Dumpty, in rather a scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master, that's all. I'm getting very tired of the cultural gatekeepers who keep telling me that a familiar word should mean, or why I should use one of their self-serving neologisms. They want to be my master. Gender now sports its own special ungrammatical ambiguity. It would insist that I can choose my own sex. Normality for normal fudges the issue. The simple noun diversity has become a doctrine. Equality, a moral concept, has become equity, a political construct. Justice is social justice, that redistributor of society's advantages and disadvantages. It's not about people getting what they deserve, it's about people getting what the state says we should have. Many of the new words have a lot to say about sex for some reason or other. You have a guess, I don't know, I can't think about it. Just cisgender, we have a new human being. Fantasy becomes oppressive, heterosexism. There's a dreadful intrusive plural pronoun because you can't say he or she. So with apologies to Tolkien and The Ring, or maybe Orwell, one thought to rule them all, one thought to bind them, one thought to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Don't let any of these abominations of language be your master.
Well done, Bruce. That was very good. That's a hard act to follow, but Ronji has got to do it. And Ronji, your topic is courage, which is why you're wearing a cap with C on it. And your 90 seconds starts now.
Sure. Growing up, I had a pretty warped idea of what courage was. I thought courage was about violence, physical fighting, taking on battles against anyone who came against me because of my family or because I was Samoan or because I was from Mangere or South Auckland. My views on courage have thankfully changed over the years. I talk a lot about the biblical worldview here on Straight Talk, and I'm unashamed about that. And central to a biblical worldview, a good one, is the courage to stand and contend for what you believe in and why do you believe it. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says, despite the persecution, hatred, and suffering that they received, he remained bold in our God to speak unto you the gospel of God with much contention. The word bold in Greek means to grow confident, have assurance, and speak with or take courage in different circumstances. But this isn't easy, right? It's hard to courageously stand for your worldview and beliefs, especially in a Mantares world today. Well, why? The word contention in that verse means conflict, it means contest, it means obstacles or hindrances. When we're street preaching in Mangere, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ in the markets, out in public, we see this verse come to life. The contest of ideas and worldviews, but also the need to have courage to stand for God's objective standard of truth. Those watching, take courage despite the difficult contests and conflicts. Mahalo.
There we go. Well done. Thank you, Ronji. Next up is Bob, and your 120 seconds starts now. Pink Shirt Day is this Friday. While well-intentioned, Pink Shirt Day is being used by activists to indoctrinate gender theory and sexual identity under the guise of anti-bullying programs, rather than deal appropriately with the issues that we're all concerned about, all bullying. And it's fairly clear when you look at the main logo with the LGBT six-colour rainbow. But people are bullied for many reasons, aren't they? Overweight people, those with acne, speech impediment, physical disability, struggling academically, different culture. They don't have a lobby group. Most schools and workplaces rightly want the focus to be on all people who are bullied for whatever reason. The funds raised for Pink Shirt Day benefits groups like Inside Out, the Rainbow Youth Program, already partly government funded, and which is indoctrinating children as young as 7 with a radical gender and sexuality message. But a really good reason to avoid Pink Shirt Day this year is because of the organisers' complete tone deafness. Remember what happened at Albert Park with the bullying and assault of UK Speaker Posey Parker, who simply wanted to highlight the protection and welfare of women? Well, the activist who organised that bully veto of Posey Parker is one of the faces of Pink Shirt Day. Yep, bullying is okay if the victim is a woman wanting to speak up for women's rights and safety, a so-called TERF. Parents, contact your school and see whether they're observing Pink Shirt Day. If they are, find out how they're doing it and is it optional. And if you have any concerns, keep your children at home that day. Don't hope for the best, it's not worth the risk. All right, and lastly, with the free speech moment is Ashley, because we're going in alphabetical order. And so Ashley, your 90 seconds starts now.
Thanks, Bob. Back in the 70s and 80s, street preaching was a common sight in cities around New Zealand. Coming from any one of a number of missionary organisations or churches, these groups were the embodiment of Christ's instruction to go into all the world and make disciples of all men. Many of those listening will have either found their faith as a result of this work or been influenced by it. But with the exception of people like Ronji, the days of these well-organised street crusades are mostly behind us. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw one in action on the main street in Napier last weekend. A well-presented guy in his mid-30s, much better looking than Ronji, and supported by a team of 20-somethings, all out and forced to share the gospel of Christ. And what I saw was contrary to the idea that these crusades have disappeared because their message no longer resonates, and that social standards have simply become so evil and so irredeemable that most people are no longer open to the transforming message of the gospel. Instead, as I sat drinking coffee at a nearby cafe, I watched as 15 to 20 young people hung off every word, thirsty for the wisdom implicit in them, just as my generation were 40 years earlier. Yes, those alive today represent the most morally vacuous generation in over 2,000 years, and yes, the very values upon which our societies were founded are being systematically demolished by people who lack the wisdom to see that they are laying the seeds of their own destruction. But as I saw on Saturday, the gospel message still resonates in a way that is no less true today than it was 40 years ago. The whole thing was an eye-opener and a reminder to clean up my act in the short time that we have left. I hope it has the same effect on you.
There we go, team. You all did a fantastic job. Very good. Right, let's get straight into the focus for today, and it's education. I want to welcome our special guest, which is Alwyn Poole, and there he is at the top of the Brady Bunch. Welcome to the program, Alwyn.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate being here.
And Alwyn is based in Cambridge. Now, he founded and was the principal of Mount Hobson Middle School, the Villa NCEA Academy in Newmarket, Auckland for the first 18 years, which is now the Mount Hobson Academy. It's a private school with a year 1 to 13 online connected program and a limited number of on-site students. Prior to that, he was at Tauranga Boys College, Hamilton Boys High School and St Cuth's College, St Cuthbert's, and former board member of the Villa Education Trust that has successfully established 2 of New Zealand's partnership schools, South Auckland Middle School and Middle School West Auckland. And in 2018, he co-founded Innovative Education Consultants. So there's a quick overview, and one of the things he has been working on recently is this document, which he published, and it's called The Appalling Condition of Our State Education System and How to Be World Leading in Just 19 Years. So this is how it's going to work, team. We're going to cover a number of sort of subheadings around truancy, around indoctrination, around latest policies announced by the parties, and also some of the proposals that have been put forward by Alwyn. So I'll get Alwyn to give us an overview, and then each time we'll go around the panel to get a question, or if you want to make comment or add to what Alwyn has already said. So as I said, first topic is general problem with the education system overall. And Alwyn, your report, you say how to be world leading in just 19 years. You released this in March. Can you just give us a Reader's Digest version of what this report is actually saying? And I guess I'll get in the first question. Why do we have to wait 19 years?
Sure. So it's a collaborative report. And Ala had the dubious privilege of spending 2 days in Cambridge last year with a range of great educators and a couple of very important opposition politicians. And I guess there was huge intention to be very positive and put some of the very best people in front of Chris Bailey from ACT and Erica Stanford from National. I'm optimistic, and it's a weird reason for being optimistic about our system. But a lot of the negatives have been going on for a very long time, but really difficult to get them out there in public and get them talked about. And I think, as I said in a piece in the Herald last week, people would almost in hushed tones say how we had a world-class education system. And it hasn't been the case for a long, long time. I guess where it's, to give you an idea of how sort of dreadfully mismanaged it is, if you take university entrance as a significant qualification in New Zealand, as it is, then our Asian students leave school at a rate of 68% with university entrance. Our Māori students leave school at a rate of 19% with university entrance. If you looked at it even from a boys and girls perspective, girls leave school at 48% with university entrance and boys with 34%. Now, why use university entrance? Well, actually not because it's, overall more superior qualification or anything like that, but it's a really nice indicator for what's happening further down the levels. So it's a good proxy for quality for a school. We have schools in New Zealand where children are retained in that school 100% until 17 years of age. We have schools in New Zealand where over 40% have left before they turn 17. We have schools in New Zealand where university entrance and other high qualifications are gained at nearly 100%. We have schools where it's zero. And even the high school that I went to, which is Wanganui City College now, it's 1.5%. It's been a failing school for 40 years. And there are many examples of that. And, our kids are being ripped off. And Ashley said, maybe we've lost a moral foundation. We can't impose that on our kids. We need to have a really aspirational education system. We need to have a very high quality education system. And we need to remember, particularly with regards to state education, why it was introduced in the first place, and restoring the role that it has in our society of giving every child that grows up in our country the opportunity to go into a good career, to earn well, to rent a good home, to own a property, to have an OE, to do all of those kinds of things.
Okay. So just before we go around the panel for initial comment, just you say how to be world leading in just 19 years. Why 19?
Yep. Well, because effectively that's a full cohort. So one of the policies that I and some others are pushing as hard as we can, and you've got some very good people in New Zealand. I think of Nathan Wallace as one, and the Comet organisation in Auckland, is something that I've called Project 5.75, where we look at the neuroscience, we look at how a baby develops within the womb, we look at the first 3 to 5 years, and we make it really prevalent throughout society that people know how to look after a baby. And we tend to think that everyone knows that, but I mean, I had my kids, we started when I was 25, you just fly by the seat of your pants. And we were very lucky back then that Ian and Mary Grant were doing their thing. You had this remarkable resource, if you like, for parenting. That kind of thing needs to be accessed and out there again. So first of all, it's looking after the child that's conceived, dare I say it, tonight. And I'm not going to say how, but through to also valuing, the kids who are in year 13 today, and teachers turning up tomorrow and doing a great job. And there are only 410 high schools in New Zealand. We are a small country, and for a minister of education to instruct ministry officials to go and set goals with each of those high schools. So a Flaxmere College isn't going to turn into King's College overnight. But if they have incremental goals that get their teachers out of bed in the morning, get their kids to school, and they're making progress, then you've got a time frame to work with them. So I guess that's why I'm thinking 19 years.
Yeah. Okay, let's go through around the panel. Actually, just a couple of quick comments here, and this one from Ricky, who said education started taking a nosedive in the 90s and has been going downhill fast since then. Bruce, I'm going to throw that question to you in just a second. Leilani says, my 16-year-old left school today. His anxiety issues affected his ability to learn in a class environment. And Charmaine says, I think schools have mishandled sex education, should be taken off them, better for parents to give resources. Actually, we're coming back to that issue. So, Bruce, did this all start in the 90s in your view?
Well, maybe the obvious examples of it started in the 90s, but it began before that. It really began back in the 60s with the advent of a loss of confidence in the understanding of the importance of our traditional learning and understanding, and the advent of cultural relativism, which became known as multiculturalism and so on. It undermined a commitment to academic performance and scholastic attainment, and that became seen as less important than what the students were said to need. And that was the beginning of the education where it became student-centred rather than content-centred.
Okay.
And it began, I mean, there are good reasons why it began. I mean, it's very easy to isolate various events that happened in the 60s and the 70s that brought that about. There were conferences around the world that deliberately changed what was actually going on in schools. It was a slow process, but it was deliberate and it was inevitable.
Okay.
But it didn't become obvious.
Ala, you've done a bit of research in this area. What's your thoughts?
Alan's pretty polite with his reckons. This hasn't been, I think this has just been an impending fire that we've seen. Yeah, I thought it was the 90s, but thanks for that history lesson, Bruce. I think education has always been a political field, unfortunately a political football, which is probably one of the most frustrating things. I think, we need to take the bureaucracy out of it. It needs to be a standing issue every election, and perhaps we need to see more parties, cross-party collaboration in order to tackle what is a crisis. I think there's been a lot of tiptoeing around calling the state of education today crisis, and I guess just wanting to affirm what Alan was saying, that we do need a more aspirational view on education, and there are plenty of educators working hard across the Motu, from the North Island to the south. They're just MOE and other bureaucrats. They're in the way. I don't know how to get rid of them. Maybe Alan's got thoughts.
Okay. Ashley, what's your opening thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely support everything Owen said, and I kind of pick up on Bruce's comments about the time frame. But for me, there's a bit of a frog in the frying pan element to this, in that, I mean, I went to school in the late 70s, early 80s, and at times when class sizes were much larger, and a lot of the things that were supposedly impediments to good education were in place. And I had a pretty good education, despite, I think, a couple of weeks ago admitting to wagging the fifth form. But when I look now at what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, that slow erosion, I think, has been able to happen because people like myself who've had kids have just assumed that the education system in place now is the same as it was 20 or 30 years ago, and therefore it can't have really been all that bad. And it's really only starting to come to light now as we're starting to get better data. The issue I've got, though, is this stuff didn't happen under the watch of this government. It's been happening for a long time. It happened under 2 previous national governments and 2 previous Labor governments. It's been going on for a really long time. And the question I've got, and I'm sure Owen will answer it later on, is it's one thing to recognise and identify the problems, but is there the political will to actually make these changes and do this stuff?
Okay. Roger, you've hung around the halls of Parliament a little. Is there any solution here? Do they know the solution?
Yeah, I'm unsure if they do. I think, and one of the things I've been thinking about with the education system, and I'm not the expert in this, I think the rest of the panel is, but it's been the politicization of the education system. I think when you're looking at the education system, you've got to go wider than just the school system itself. I've been looking at some of the achievement rates, obviously, connected to the system. When we look at also the increasing levels of anxiety for young people, we've got NEET rates that are just booming in poorer areas, especially those with high Māori and high Pacific populations. So when you've got all of that mix coming in around that, some of the other wider social issues, that then impacts the school system, the education system that's going on. Can I just quickly read a quote from Thomas Sowell? Because I've been trying to read about minority education. How do you educate minority groups? And Thomas Sowell once put it beautifully this way. Put bluntly, failure attracts more money than success. Politically, failure becomes a reason to demand more money, smaller classes, and more trendy courses and programs. Politicians want to look compassionate and concerned, knowing that voting money, that people are voting for those things based on their projects and the accomplishments that they're saying out there in public. And so I think what Thomas Sowell is pointing to is the minute it becomes a political football, that's when it becomes indoctrination, that you've got a whole bunch of ideologies that are fighting there, rather than getting actually to the nuts and bolts of what an education system should be doing. Get the politics out of it. Okay, well, let's just look at the policy announcements. National Party leader Christopher Luxon announced their education policy a few weeks ago. They want 80% of Year 8 students, so that's Form 2 at intermediate for us oldies, being at or above the expected curriculum level for reading, writing, maths and science. They want students to the top 10 in the world in maths, reading and science. So a big
focus on that. How are they going to do that? Require all primary and intermediate schools to provide at least an hour of reading, hour of writing and an hour of maths on average every day. Labor's policy, so we covered the national one in a bit of detail a couple of weeks ago. Labor, previously, they talked about reducing class sizes, and I think people figured out it was one less student in the class. But today, they announced that this year's budget will include funding for 300 new classrooms in up to 4 new schools. And according to the Prime Minister, this will increase teaching and learning, 6,600 new student spaces established, which aims to ease the pressure on the school rolls. In the short term, the goal is an establishment of 2,200 and long term 4,400, and that's to account for future roll growth. Let me just show you a couple of clips of what he said today. Firstly, he talked about the importance of buildings.
Ultimately, teaching and learning will be better if the space that teachers and students and young people are in are of higher quality. When they've got buckets on the floor because the roof is leaking, that's a huge distraction from teaching and learning, which is what we really want them focused on. Now, it's not the ultimate solution to literacy and numeracy. The quality of teaching and the quality of learning is going to be the thing that's going to turn around literacy and numeracy, and the Minister can speak at great length around the work that we're doing in that area. But I'm not going to say that we should just ignore the state of our school buildings while we focus on literacy and numeracy. We've got to do both.
Okay, and then he talked about the track record of new classrooms so far.
Our track record of delivery, as I've said, in the time that we've been in government, every budget we've put aside extra funding for school buildings. And if you look at the fact that we've delivered more than half of the new school classrooms that we funded, that is a sign that we are getting momentum in this area. School buildings, school classrooms, particularly if you take, say, a school like this one where it's a multi-level building on a complex site because of the hillside and all of those sorts of things, they don't just happen overnight. You've got to make sure you get the design right and that all of the engineering work is done so that the school gets a really good learning environment out the other side of it. But I think our track record shows that we do get the money out the door and we do actually get these building projects underway.
Okay, so here's the interesting bit, I think. In the midst of a truancy catastrophe and declining literacy and numeracy levels, Chris Hipkins, and remember he was the previous Minister of Education since 2017, he said today, quote, "Since 2017 we have worked to fix the foundations of our education system by upgrading every school in the country and funding over 2,700 new classrooms for 60,000 more student places." So, Alwyn, if you compare what the Nats are saying and what Labor is saying and has done, is there any sun on the horizon in your view?
Well, to reflect on a couple of the comments about when the decline started, don't be in any doubt, and I'll never join a political party. It's just not something that I'm sort of willing to do, and I want to keep my independence in that sense. But things really have been driven off the cliff in the last 5 years. That's not to say everything was rosy before that, but you have seen a huge loss in respect and engagement in the education system. And again, looking at one particular example that stunned me, and first of all, it was an anecdote where a student from Parnell College in Auckland got in touch with me, and it was about some data project he was doing, and I said, well, how's things going there, and what's attendance like? And he told me that a lot of him and his friends had found out under lockdown that they could access some of the very, very best teachers in the world, via the internet. They could learn around a coffee table or virtually together when they weren't allowed to be together, far more effectively than they were doing in school. And I actually think that we are in a very powerful watershed situation, not just in New Zealand. In the US, something like 1.2 million kids haven't gone back to school after lockdown. Their parents are homeschooling them, or they're in smaller school situations. At the beginning of 2022, I helped the Village Education Trust set up a Mount Hobson Academy Connected, which is a nationwide online school. Brilliant teachers. And what changed there, it's not an easy thing to do to set up and establish a school, because a whole lot of things need to come together at once. One, you've got to have a good curriculum, which we have. And then for an online school, you needed really good virtual classroom spaces. And so, yeah, I don't know that we should be investing so much in bricks and mortar. I think we should be thinking about what are the other modes that are going to be more powerful. Please forgive the cats fighting in the background. And a lot of parents under lockdown throughout the world, including in New Zealand, both looked at what was being taught and the quality of the teaching and just said, well, it's not for our kids. We've got 10,000 children in New Zealand not enrolled anywhere. So they're not homeschoolers either. They're just nowhere. They're in the wind. And that's been growing over time. But we have a lot of interest in that online academy and a lot of families, and it can be geographically isolated, and families worked out under lockdown that, driving an hour to drop their kids at a bus who then takes another half an hour to get to school, that's 3 hours out of their day that they can use more effectively at home and be a lot happier about it. We have, according to PISA, the highest bullying rates in schools in the whole world, and a lot of kids suffer in those situations. And you mentioned the parent who said that her 16-year-old boy had left school today due to anxiety and feeling like he can't engage. Well, I'd say get in touch with Syra Boyle at Mount Hobson Academy, because they're really good at reintegrating kids into their learning and again being aspirational. And so to me, that's the big change that's in the wind. And going back to that boy from Parnell College, he was an Asian student, in the latest data, the Term 4 attendance data, Asian attendance, full-time attendance at school, or 9 days out of 10, is down to 58%.
Wow.
And to me, that again really says something, because these are the children that you would have had an expectation are most diligent. And yeah, it's a big deal, and it's happening right under our noses. And I don't think anything that Labor have proposed so far is shifting it. And to give you an idea how disengaged the schools were, at the beginning or early in 2022, the Education and Workforce Committee in Parliament held an investigation into attendance. Now, we've got about 2,600 schools in New Zealand. 8 schools submitted. That's all. And then on the basis of that, the government spent something like $160 million on attendance officers, and hardly any of them are in a position anyway. So it's been really bizarre.
Okay,
and you'll
let's
notice on a political side that Jan Tierney wasn't really allowed to talk today because she's doing such a bad job of the education portfolio that Hipkins took over. So
doesn't give out a lot of confidence, that's for sure. Okay, let's just go around the panel. Ashley, I mean, you live rurally. Do you think that, let's just look at the political parties first. Do you see any ray of sunshine coming out of any of the political parties with any policy? Oh, turn your mic on. Oh, there we go, Sorry, just start again. It was our fault. No,
that's all right. I see a little bit out of national in terms of the rhetoric, but it's the same rhetoric we've heard in previous years. I just say, look, I defer completely to Owen in terms of when this happened, the last 5 years. If that's what he says, then I totally accept it. What I did notice about that clip from Hipkins, and it's interesting because it epitomises their approach to everything, is there was nothing aspirational about educational standards. It was all about money. Money's not the solution to things. Leadership's the solution. Initiative's the solution. Money's the thing that you put in place afterward to fund those things. But all of it, everything that he talked about was about putting money in place, and the inference seemed to be that if you put more money into it, that somehow the problem was going to be fixed. But in answer to your question, tiny little wee crack of from national in terms of their policies, but whether or not they implement them, because I've heard this stuff before, time will tell.
Okay, Ala, were you optimistic about what you heard today from Labor?
I don't really care about any of those political policies. I care more about those on the front line, to be honest. And so I think we need to ensure that their voices, as Elwyn is doing and has done for a long time, that their voices are being amplified in terms of teachers and principals. We've heard lots about the strikes in communities that want their young people to do well. Like, who cares about politicians? Like, they're annoying, actually. They are in the way. I think they're just in the way of a lot of good ideas. I'm not sure how to get them out of the way other than physically ship them to another island, but that's probably illegal. So,
Okay.
that's my solution.
Ronji, you've got the same sentiment?
Yeah, maybe we could ship them to Tonga, as long as they're not here. Okay, well, there we go.
No rivalry here, eh?
Yeah, no. Look, I won't disagree too much. I don't see much hope in any of the policies that's been released around education, to be honest. I don't think it's really addressing some of the key issues. And that clip that was shown, that short clip there, I thought that Hipkins was building a straw man, to be honest, because he was focused, he kept on repeating buildings. He didn't talk about anything around curriculum or anything else to really get stuck into the education system and bring about change. So he was actually probably doing a bit of a diversionary tactic and building a straw man, but actually didn't address the real issues of what's broken that Alla and Alwyn probably know a lot better than I do. But I thought it was real politics. Again, like I said before, get the politics out of the system.
Okay, I mean, here's a comment from Veronica who says, I agree money doesn't fix everything, but it does help when it's going into the right areas. Bruce, if you were Minister of Education right now, what would you be investing in, or where would you be investing? Is it classrooms?
Well, not where Chris Hipkins is. I'd be investing the money in trying to find out the kind of things that students should actually be learning. I'd be looking at how we got to where we are, because Elwyn and Ashley are quite right. We have had a speeding up of the disintegration of education in schools over the last 5 years. There are obvious reasons for that, but it's because it's been going on for some time. I think we need to look back a bit and see when and what actually influenced what's actually going on in schools. What are the philosophies that are influencing what happens in schools, the way kids are being taught and what they're being taught? That's I'd spend money on, finding out what's actually going on in schools.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Truancy issues. Does the government have any idea? I mean, apparently Michael Wood, even, who's a minister with Labor, said the ministry needs to get a rocket under them because there were revelations by News Hub that just one attendance officer has begun working from funding intended for 82. And Education Minister Jan Tinetti, who we highlighted a couple of weeks back when she couldn't get her stats in order around truancy rates, and as I said, doesn't give you much confidence. She said today that everything is under control.
Let the Minister answer that question.
So we've got contracts out, 19 contracts, which is about, I don't want to say the FTEs around that, but we've actually got 3 as of last week on Friday, and it's going up on a daily basis. I'm celebrating that it's going up on a daily basis.
Yeah, there we go. So it's going up on a daily basis from 1 to 3 and maybe a few more. Well, Ashley, you admitted you were wagging. Is there any incentive to get back to school?
No, and I'm in two minds over this because I was, and I will be shocked, but I revealed last week or the week before that in my 5th form year I actually went home at lunchtime to watch the soaps, and I got to the point in August where they told me if I took one more half day off I couldn't sit school C. So it's not a new thing. However, this is a much more endemic issue. I was a problem child. This is an issue that affects a lot more people, and it's obviously not just to do with people just being lazy and unmotivated. It's to do with an endemic problem throughout the entire system, which I think you touch on in some of your solutions, Owen.
Yeah. Ashley, is it, sorry, not Ashley, Ronji, is it endemic, do you think? I mean, are you seeing it in the communities?
Yeah, I believe it is, and I think that's why I touched on that point that it's for what we're seeing, especially in South Auckland, it's more than just what's happening inside the school, it's everything outside of the school as well, in terms of the family unit, in terms of domestic violence, in terms of reliance on welfare, all of those kinds of things, I think, impact into what's happening into the life of a child. And look, this is, look, I was kicked out of schools. I went missing for nearly half of my high school years. I was one of these statistics that I was talking about. I had a question, if that's all right, to Alwyn,
Yeah.
please, Bob. And my question is this. I'm just wondering then, for all these truancy things, numbers that you guys are quoting, which is terrible, especially that 10,000 number that's just not anywhere really. Is there data around there about why they truant, why they're being truant? Is it around ideological issues, whether the curriculum sucks? Is it around social issues, whether it's the problem stuff at home that I just mentioned, or is it around money that they need to go and, like, I missed a lot of my schooling because I was helping to pay the mortgage at home, paying the bills because we were poor. And so I'm just interested in to see why kids are not going to school. Is it just straight up boring?
Well, to me, the solution is around a lot of what Ala's just said before, that teacher quality, which Labor and even National don't really talk about. Teacher quality is incredibly important, and leadership quality within those schools is incredibly important. And so you've got to think from a child's perspective, why would you bother going to some of these situations? Why would you bother going to school? And as I said, some of them are actually highly aspirational children who are making a very strongly thought through decision about where they learn better. And then you do have a whole lot of peer pressure and things like that. But then, schools try and say, well, every day is important, and suddenly they're all home on strike, or they're rostered home, or schools are having teacher-only days ad nauseum. And I try and keep my ear close to the ground, and there are people who are just like, my kid hardly went to school during term one, even when they wanted to go to school. It wasn't available for them. And so we've got this kind of bizarre situation where, it's like the nail was bent, but we just keep whacking it. Instead of stepping back and saying, you know what, we need really good teachers. We need the teachers who are not doing a great job to go and do something else. You said, what's the solution I suggested earlier in the year? And we've got 4,200 Ministry of Education bureaucrats. Surely they'd do better fighting in the Ukraine. It's an enormous amount of money, an enormous group of people, and I, for the life of me, don't know what they do. But they're certainly not bringing about success through the New Zealand education system. And I cannot find a principal or school leader who thinks highly of the ministry overall. They will all say there are some very good people working in the front lines of those ministry services. But the ministry refuses to do a 360-degree review to go, what does the sector need from us? And I think the other incredibly important point that very few people talk about politically or in education leadership is the role of the parent. And having our right through, having parents reading to their children every night and being highly encouraged by the school to do so, having parents welcome within the schools is really important. I know I've got schools that basically lock parents out. They're not allowed past the counter. Where I'd say, no, have them in. Let them sit in a class. Let them understand the learning. And, the kids will be embarrassed the first time their parent comes in. But then they'll think it's pretty cool. And so we've actually got to, if we want the education system to work, that is an if, there are alternatives, but if we want it to work for the kids who can't have those alternatives, then we need to re-enfranchise parents and have parents as the most important people in the education of their child.
Okay, Ala, that will be music to your ears. I mean, it comes back
Absolutely.
to families, isn't it?
I 100% agree. I think to just give a bit of a real life context to what Alan was saying, I spoke to a principal of an intermediate school in Papatoa in South Auckland, and he was saying when he first started at his intermediate, he'd come back from the UK, his school had barbed wired around their physical, so obviously no one, like when you think barbed wire, you think prison. So that wasn't exactly given off welcome, come into our school or inviting. So the first thing he got rid of was that barbed wire. And exactly to what Alan was saying, his focus was on rebuilding trust with parents and the local community around that school, because the prior principal hadn't really, I don't think prioritised, but it wasn't a priority for them. So to Alwyn's point around leadership and teacher education, those are two things that often get left out of policy. I think for good reason. If you look at all our teacher training programs, the majority of them sit with universities. Universities aren't exactly producing the most bright cookies right now, and they're dwindling in numbers and funding. So I think if we need to start talking about teacher quality. It matters who we put in front of our young people, and how they're formed and how they're shaped and how they're trained, yet we fail to see it in policy. So maybe we could start there.
Okay, and Andrew has obviously been listening to you, Ala, because he says the quality of teachers is woeful compared to 20 to 30 years ago. The universities are to blame as they are indoctrinated with woke ideology rather than teaching a proper degree. Bruce, you were involved in that many years ago. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I certainly do agree with that. Can I just illustrate from a little bit of my own experience? Ashley and Ronji, I went to school in the 1950s, would you believe? And I wagged school as well. Often.
It doesn't show, Bruce.
And several of my
It does a little bit.
Well. And I even got caned for it, as we did in those days. But one of the differences is that the culture supported the school, and the school supported the culture. There was no tension between what parents wanted and what teachers wanted, because there was a general agreement about what I went to a boys' school, so I'll stick with that, what young men needed. Young men need boundaries. They need to be disciplined and given a kind of excitement about life so that they accept a sense of responsibility. If young men don't have those boundaries, they don't have a sense of responsibility, they don't have a bit of excitement about their lives, and as well as that, they're actually learning content that stretches them and helps them understand more about the world, not just about themselves, but the world generally, then they will tend to prosper. One of the reasons that kids, in fact the young boys in particular, because they're not doing as well as girls in schools, one of the reasons is because boys are not being given a framework for a start, and they're not being challenged, and they're not being shaped. And they want discipline, they need discipline, but they're not actually being given that because we've become, I don't know what we call it, we have a very sentimental understanding of what it means to be disciplined.
Okay, well, that's a great segue into this next bit, and that's that the question is the LGBT and the critical theory agenda in schools overshadowing genuine education? And most of you will be aware that we've produced a document which outlines what your children will be taught for sex education and relationships, and it's offensive stuff most parents aren't aware, so we're making them aware. And also what kids are being taught in terms of critical theory as well, and those are available on our website. So, Alwyn, let me throw this straight to you. Are basically schools just so focused on woke things such as, for example, Pink Shirt Day coming up and all the other days that they're celebrating, that they've actually lost sight of basic reading, maths and science and English, core subjects?
Yeah, so because of the nature of the schools that I've run, I've never taken, never made a stated stand on sexuality, etc. Because when a family comes to a school, they are all welcomed, and we've had lots of kids who have gay parents and things like that. And it's really important that they know when they come into our school that it's a good place for them to be, a good place for them to learn. Yep. Where they're valued. At the same time, I think that the sexuality and sex education has always belonged in the home and not the school. And, certainly with a lot of the stuff that's in that document for years 1 to 8, I can't believe that we're actually advocating that we're going to be talking to year 1 to 8 students about puberty blockers and things like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's not something that I would have wanted my children being discussed, in a range of ways. But it's a broader thing too. There's so much in schools that is negative. Now, my first degree was economics. I feel like this is a bit of a club tonight, so I have to admit that I didn't go to school in 1984 for 2 weeks while the Olympics were on. But there's so much positivity. So I'm looking at my bookshelf here, The Improving State of the World, which is by Indira Goswami, or even going back to The Ultimate Resource by Julian Simon. And all sorts of research about how the world is becoming a better and better place to live. We're living longer, places are becoming cleaner in terms of pollution. There are so many good stories, but our school system is by and large pessimistic and negative. And I guess that kind of critical theory comes into it, because it's a sense that there's all this sort of power imbalance, etc., and it just detracts the aspiration again away from children, and adults, and particularly ideological thinkers, are just so willing and keen to extract from children their childhood and impose on them the problems of the world, and they don't deserve that. And further to what Bruce was said. Someone asked me the other day if I thought that the Back to Basics national thing was a good thing, and my comment was I want our kids to be literate, not just to have basic literacy. And probably the last thing I'd say on that, there are some great schools in New Zealand, and I know that Arla heard Nathan Jury speak at Cambridge at the event I hosted last year at Manakura. A lot of the Catholic schools are doing a remarkably good job. There are some very good state schools. So to me, highlighting those schools and saying, how do they keep the concentration on those important basics is a really good question to ask.
Okay. Ronji, the whole area of critical theory, I mean, do you think it's just engulfing our education and it's doing more harm than good?
Yeah, look, I'm an outsider to the education system, so I can only take it on what I read, what I see, what I dig into, and I just think it's ridiculous that those kinds of theories and ideologies are forced on young people. And I think what you're seeing is young people, whether it's from primary, intermediate, all the way up to university, are being taught what to think, not how to think. And I think that's the danger, because if you're being taught what to think by a certain group of people that want to indoctrinate you or tell you that this is the way that you should see the world, then you're not going to be able to test those truth claims properly, because you're going to get shouted down if you disagree with those kinds of views. And so whether it's critical theory or the indoctrination around gender ideology, I just think it's ridiculous that we're pushing that kind of stuff. Let the kids be kids. But this is an outsider's perspective, and I just don't know why we're allowing this so much, why our government and our politicians are so driven into this kind of, why the bureaucrats are driven to this kind of thinking, and we're not teaching our kids to have a childhood and to be able to learn how to think and be literate and all that kind of stuff. We're telling them that this is the way you should think, and that's not right.
Yeah, Bruce, it's definitely not communities or parents demanding this type of material. It's a top-down approach, and that's why I call it indoctrination, isn't it? That's the plan, isn't it?
It certainly is indoctrination. And it has been for some time. I was trying to think of something, and it just slipped my mind there. The speeding up of education is true. It has happened in the last 5 years, and it's appeared to be more intense than it actually is, because parents now find themselves more on the front line than they were back a few years ago. There is an immediacy with sexuality education, because it gets us in areas that's much more intimate, much more involved, and the kind of relationship we have with our children can seem to be under threat. And it often is. And so now we have a consequence where parents are so much more involved because they can see what's actually going on. And the ideas of critical theory and cultural relativism, which have given rise to a kind of tribal culture, where it becomes much more important to be a member of a tribe than to be a citizen in a state, that tribal membership takes a great deal of confidence out of the culture because it insists on its own tribal autonomy. And that, in the particular case of sexuality education, that's very marked.
Yeah. And just finally, Ala, I mean, I get the impression that most teachers don't want to be part of a lot of this indoctrination. I mean, a lot of schools aren't doing pink shirt, they aren't doing the relationships and sexual education, the extreme aspects of it. You know, it's been pushed down, but most professional teachers are just wanting to get on and do the core subjects, aren't they?
Yeah, I would say so. I think anecdotally from teachers in state and, say, Christian schools or character schools, I think they're already inundated with a lot of things. Their workload is already huge on its own without all the new curriculum changes. So to have Wellington say that you need to integrate RSE or the sexual education stuff into how you teach maths and English, yeah, I think those that sit in those ivory towers in Wellington, they live in a different reality. It's unfortunate that they make a lot of the decisions that impact those in the front line. So I think there's still some autonomy. I think that's where I'm hopeful, is that there is still some autonomy for schools to pick and choose what goes into the curriculum, what they can endorse, what they can teach, and push back in those ways, perhaps. So I like that there is still that choice for schools to do that. So all power to the teachers.
Okay, just finally, we're just about out of time. Alwyn, I mean, you were involved with charter schools, and one of the first things the Labor government did when they came in was immediately boot them out. And for some reason, the left don't like charter schools. They don't seem to like parental choice. Even homeschooling, they're not that keen on. Why do they hate those things? So why do they hate parental choice and that ability to go to a school that you want to go to?
Well, at times they'll try and say that kids have got choice, and you know, I publish the Levers data, collate it and publish it every year for every school. And so, for instance, the kids who come out of South Auckland Middle School, their choice is between Mangarewa High, James Cook, Alfriston and Papakura. And there are good people in those schools that are trying hard. I've got a lot of time for Pete Jones, who's the principal of Mangarewa High. But the results aren't flash. And so, you know, these kids have not really got choice at all. And the other thing that the union does is, the ministry does, alongside the unions, is protect what they call the network. So in the last few years, a number of us have applied for designated character schools because both Ardern and Hitkins said that they would improve the designated character model, so when parents wanted something different for their children, people like me could apply and would get through. Well, the ministry's saying no, and then come up with reasons why not. I'm not in favour of going back to the charter school model. The main reason being that when any policy is imposed, there are two outcomes. One is the genuine outcome of the policy, and the other are the outcomes that the sector allows. And so all going back to charter schools would do would bring the unions out of the ground like zombies, and they'd start ranting and raving again as they did for 5 or 6 years. I think there's a way of building the designated character model. There are 51 designated character schools in New Zealand. And to have those schools approved outside of the ministry and outside of the network, but with some of the safeguards that people would say maybe charter schools were missing, is to me a much, much better way. And I think that will take off. Will the ministry, etc., be in favour of it? No, probably not. But ultimately, again, parents need to get out and have a say. And it's interesting, you know, we are just slowly waking up to what our children need in New Zealand. In other countries, they've been much more engaged, and that's right across ethnicities. We've been so quiet in New Zealand for so long, but there has to be alternatives for kids. In the UK, if you want to homeschool your child, all you do is notify the ministry here you've got to go through some awful process, and it feels very, very imposing. And again, back to that model that we set up at the beginning of last year, there is a parent-led option at Mount Hobson Academy where they can have all of the resources, but their child's involved and they don't enrolled, and they don't need to go through the ministry program.
Okay.
But I go back to what I've kind of said throughout. I'm actually really optimistic because, as Bruce said just a few minutes ago, this is the first time really that we've seen parents as engaged as they are. And so it's a time where we can actually bring change, but people are going to have to keep asking for it. Who's responsible for our education system? Ultimately, it's the parents and the families.
Okay, and Alan, is it fair to say that actually COVID did us a favour because a lot of parents actually got to see what schooling their children were getting? Would that be a fair statement?
Well, I think it's what do they say, silver lining. Yeah.
Parents are just becoming more engaged, though. You think?
Guess, yeah. I think people also have got deeply sick of schools acting as if they own the kids themselves, or the ministry acting as if they own them. And even Chris Hipkins in his announcements, I've got this pet hate for them saying we're putting 300 million into something. They're not putting anything into it. They're allocating your money to it. Yeah. And so not only do parents have sovereignty over their children, they're also the people who pay for the schools. And so, to parents, go along to board meetings. You don't have speaking rights, but you can listen and you can ask questions later and you can write things in, find out what's going on in your school, finding out how you can improve it. There are some high schools where they do such an excellent job that get involved and be positive. There are other schools that I call can do well schools, where parents need to know, understand the qualification system, make sure their kids are making the right choices, support them in homework, basic things that I'm not sure people think about that much, but I would never have an internet capable device behind a closed bedroom door for kids. Have a lot of that stuff all in public spaces, encourage literacy. And then there are other schools where it's really tough for your child to succeed. And again, as a parent, you need to know that 33% of Māori boys in South Auckland are leaving school without level 1 NCEA. Now, you can trip over and hit your head and get credits, but that's just how bad it is. And so in those situations as a parent, you've really got to get stuck in and be the helicopter parent.
Okay, let's. I'm going to come around the panel and just get a closing comment just to sum up tonight's show. Just this one though. No, where did it go? Oh, I kept. This is Leilani who said I kept asking questions in my school and I ended up becoming a Board of Trustees member. So there we go. That is the way to do it. So let's go. Let's just quickly go through around the panel and just get some concluding statements very quickly. Bruce, do you want to kick us off? What have we learnt tonight? What's your word of encouragement for parents?
Well, word of encouragement for parents is just what Alan has just said. They finance education, for goodness sake. It wouldn't work if parents didn't pay for it. It's a taxpayer phenomenon, and parents are responsible for the children, and they are responsible for what happens to their children. And for the state to try and compromise that is, I would say, outrageous.
Yeah, it does bug me when they say they're spending all this money, but what they're just saying is actually we're taking your money and we're going to spend it where we want to focus it on.
Yeah, well, yes, we could. Yeah.
Yeah. Ala, thumbs up. What do you think?
Yep, agree with what's been said. I think one of the things to note out of some of the research from lockdowns is that the relationship between schools and parents is one of sort of the recurring findings that was either a negative or a positive thing. In general, most of some of the stuff that's come out of the Education Review Office is that it highlighted that there needed to be more of a working together between families, parents and schools. So I guess to reiterate what Alwyn was saying is that parents are the first teachers, home is the first classroom. So if you see the letters PAYE on your pay slip, you have a vested interest in your child's education and lifelong learning. So get involved, whether it's attending board meetings, going to parent-teacher interviews. I think Ashley talked about that high trust model that would have been the norms back in the days, all your guys' education days. That's not the case anymore. So for parents, get involved, do the reading at home, make learning fun. Learning starts at home. I think we often miss the fact that your home is the first classroom. You can read with your kids. Don't put them behind a screen as well. Take them outside, let them climb a tree, let them fall. They'll get up, they're resilient. So parents just get involved in any way, in any capacity.
Yeah, and Ashley, I think you have hit the nail on the head in terms of the trust, isn't there? There's been a development of a lack of trust, and we need to rebuild that, don't we?
Yeah, there's a bigger issue here for me though, and that is that the school's kind of a subset of society as a whole. And there's been a couple of comments tonight about indoctrination. Actually, it is the role of schools. One of the roles of schools to indoctrinate kids. That's actually part of their purpose, and it's about producing kids that are well-educated, well-rounded, but also are good citizens. The Americans even have a term for it. They call it civics. So the idea of actually producing children with a certain worldview has been going on for as long as we've had an education system. What's changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, however long you want to measure it, is that the nature of that indoctrination has become different. And I mean, I'm not into conspiracy theories in any big way, but boy, if you were to have a look at what's going on in our education system now and the nature of that indoctrination, it's from groups that are pushing ideologies which are different to or at odds with what we would have thought was normal 20 or 30 years ago. And just to answer your question, Bob, before about charter schools and why there's such an aversion to them within the system, it's because it doesn't fit within that model, because those charter schools, those schools that have got a different directive, don't fit within that model of indoctrination that's currently in vogue, and therefore the system doesn't want them. It wants to be able to bring all kids into the system so that it can inculcate them with the viewpoint that seems to be the one that's the de jure at the moment. So indoctrination is a thing. It's just what you indoctrinate kids with.
Okay, and Ronji, you were supposed to be in bed 7 minutes ago with your electric blanket. Final comment?
Yeah, terrible time management, Bob. That's my first comment. Secondly,
you say that every week.
You learned it in school.
Well, and you haven't gotten better. So anyway, I think, look, I've learned a little bit about these experts. I'm an outsider to the education systems that you guys have been talking about, teacher quality and leadership, and I sort of get that. What's the point of all that when the curriculum sucks, when the bureaucracy is blocking all of that kind of stuff? And look, I don't know if I'm fully convinced with some of the stuff that I've heard today, but I've enjoyed the conversation and learned. And I guess I'd come back to my free speech moment, the courage. Where's the courage of good educators, the courage of parents to get involved and make sure that they're not teaching rubbish to the kids, and the courage for us as a community and as a country to want a better aspirational education system, and one that's just not full of the cultural elite telling us what to think.
Okay, well summed up. We're out of time. Alwyn, really want to thank you for your time tonight. That was great. In fact, we ran out of time for a couple of the issues we were going to cover, so we'll get you back at some stage. But thanks for being part of Straight Talk tonight. And to our regular panellists, well done. Not too bad. Gave you about a 6.5 out of 10, so that's good. At least you were here. At least you weren't wagging, so that's the main thing, unlike Christine and Alfred. So we'll have a word to them. Anyway, folks, we are out of time, so have a great week, and we will see you back here next Monday night at 8 o'clock for Straight Talk. Good night.